This is former Indiana basketball player Greg Green. Keep up with the Hoosiers on Indiana Sports Beat with Jim Coyle.
Today's guest is brought to you by Reynolds Family Dentistry of Sellersburg. You need $1 million smile for those championship photos, and that's exactly what you'll get with Reynolds Family Dentistry. Welcome back to Indiana Sports Beat, coming to you, of course, from the Golf Club at Eagle Point Studios. Jim Coyle with you as always. Got Jake at the wheel, and we're joined now by a good friend of the show, Mike Schumann from the Daily Hoosier. Michael, how are you, sir?
Doing great. How are you doing, Jim?
Good. Just got off with Jordan Hulls, recently named MVP over in Europe and Germany, and man, oh man, Indiana can certainly use his shooting. He just had a season where he wrapped up 49% shooting from the three-point line.
That's amazing. Yeah, his whole story is really amazing. And one thing I saw about a month ago when I was doing a little bit of homework on our current Indiana team is the numbers that his 2013 team put up when he was a senior. I believe 4 starters on that team were above 40% from behind the three-point line with him leading the way, which is just truly incredible in the context of what we've seen the last couple of years, and really highlights the kind of difference that good three-point shooters can make.
Yeah, one thing I failed to bring up to him, and I meant to, was it kind of reminds me of Mitchell Page, who also, Jordan had a career where everybody said, oh, you're too short, you're too slow, you this, that, the other thing. Well, that's okay. He just goes out and continues to just knock it down. And Mitchell Page, the same thing. He was also MVP last year. A huge season for him over there. But he talked about that, being able to overcome that stuff. But, man, you talk about that shooting stroke. Indiana could certainly use that. And then, of course, there's no news bigger right now than the news of John Beilein leaving Michigan to go to the NBA Cavs. That in itself is just a huge story. But also the 2 recruits that are on that team that are potential to look elsewhere could certainly fill a void that Indiana has right now.
Yeah, they're certainly, if they do end up going elsewhere, they're certainly going to be a help to somebody on a very late kind of surprise approach there, because at this point, I think all IU fans are thinking the roster for next year is pretty well set, and to have a couple top 100 guys free up would be something to behold. I think I saw a couple quotes where people got to those recruits yesterday and asked them the question, and they said that they're going to hold out and see who the coach is, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So it'll be interesting how quickly Michigan is able to kind of capture the momentum that they've built over the last few years, and see if they can pull somebody out of a program here late, or if they just decide to stay within. They've got some guys within that have helped along the way here. So I think it's going to be interesting for sure. That the 2 recruits that Michigan has coming in for this year, they're not guards, they're more kind of wings. So, I guess the main question as far as fit at Indiana would be, surrounding Jerome Hunter. I'd say they're along the lines of him. And does Indiana at this point feel confident enough that they're going to, have that spot pretty well filled? I mean, you can always certainly use more players of that caliber of talent, but that might impact how hard they push as it relates to these guys. I did also read yesterday that, this news came out yesterday, probably coaches and other insiders knew beforehand, but one of the players, Jalen Wilson, who's the highest rated of the 2, had already been contacted, or his family or coaches had been contacted by 20 different schools. So it's going to be a highly competitive situation if he does go back out on the market.
Yeah, something I mentioned that if and only if those 2 guys were looking to go someplace together. Of course, Indiana is a school that has 2 open scholarships, but there's nothing that's been said to make that a belief or anything. It's just something I thought of. But and they may not leave at all. Like you said, they may wait to see who that coach is. Now, that's going to be huge on who they get as a coach, what their options are. Obviously, a name that popped up early was Dane Fife, former Indiana basketball player. And he's been at Michigan State for the last 8 years, but his brother was a captain on the Michigan basketball team. He's from Michigan. As far as a natural fit, that's probably one of the best natural fits, but that doesn't mean it is a fit for them. And it's going to be interesting to see who ends up getting that job. That's a pretty good job.
Yeah, Fife would be definitely interesting to me. I've heard him give a few interviews over the last year, and in each and every one of them, he's been asked the question of, when are you going to take a head coaching job? Because it's just a logical question. He's already been a head coach. He's been under a great coach like Izzo, as you said, for a while now. And each time he said, you know what, I've got relatively young kids. I've got a pretty good situation here. He was alluding to the fact that it probably wouldn't be until his kids were grown up so that he didn't have to take on, all the burdens of being a head coach and could kind of continue to, be a dad, so to speak. So if he does it, this tells you that, that this was one of those jobs that he just couldn't say no to. And it would be understandable growing up in Michigan like he did.
And getting back to Indiana, though, Indiana has got to they've got 2 empty scholarships, and there's been just a lot of speculation on what's going to happen with those. Are they going to, quote unquote, bank them, which to me is just a waste, because with the grad transfer now available, but under Archie's system, I don't know how easy it is for a grad transfer to come in one. If you only have one season of eligibility, I'm not sure how easy it is to come into that system and to have a lot of success with it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also say that most of the names that I would have said are, guys they just absolutely have to go after because they fit the needs on the roster are pretty much gone. I don't know that there's that many grad transfers right now that kind of fit the bill of what Indiana's looking for, both from a talent standpoint and a Big Ten ready standpoint, and then just layer on what you're saying about understanding all the intricacies of the pack line and being ready for that as well. I do think it's hard, and what I've understood is that Indiana as a school has special graduate program admission requirements that they don't make exceptions for athletes, and so there's a higher bar coming into IU for grad transfers that kind of takes a lot of people off the board just before they even get started. So it's not an easy thing for IU to fill up for a number of reasons. And I've not, in the last few weeks, I've not heard any names that they might still be talking to a player or two, but it's not materialized to the point where it's kind of leaking out to become mainstream. So I won't be surprised at all if where we're at now is where we're at in November, save for something unusual like the Michigan situation.
And that begs the question, with Indiana having 2 open scholarships and largely on the backs of basically failing to land any of these national recruits that Archie's been going after, is there an issue with recruiting to Indiana? I mean, obviously, kids on a national scene do not view Indiana right now as to me, I've stated it clearly. They do not see Indiana as a path to the NBA. I mentioned the fact that in 9 years as the head coach, Archie Miller has not had a player drafted into the NBA. And Romeo Langford, of course, will change that technically, but he came to Indiana by default, and he was a projected top 5 pick before he got to Indiana. And right now he's dropped down to the outside of the top 20.
Yeah, I'm not ready to say that there's an issue there. I mean, clearly it's the trend has changed here, but I think it all comes down to really one player. I mean, if Keon Brooks had chosen Indiana, I think the whole narrative around recruiting right now would be completely different. And so I don't want to put too much emphasis on one player. I mean, it clearly, is going to put a lot more pressure on the 2020 class for Archie Miller because, he's obviously, already through 2 years with no NCAA tournament appearances, and he's probably not going to have, he's got more than 3 years, but he doesn't clearly have more than 4 years, especially if the current trend line continues the way it is. My money would be on 4 to 5 years if things don't show a lot of improvement. And so the kind of kids that they're recruiting for 2020 right now are not, for the most part, guys that are going to be day one game changers. So they're guys like Anthony Leal and Trey Galloway that you're going to try to build a program around it. And, hopefully by the time that they're upperclassmen are really successful at a Big Ten level. And so, kind of marry up those timelines. And it's really interesting as to whether, you know, what the approach that's being taken right now and the type of recruits that Indiana is going to likely be landing. How does that give Miller enough time to do what he's trying to do at Indiana? It's an interesting time, and the guys that are going to determine that are the guys that we keep talking about right now as the likely recruits for 2020.
Yeah, I mean, that's the perfect point, because if now the recruiting efforts have switched to 2020, and then if you're looking at another 2 years after that before they make an impact, we're looking pretty far out. And is the fan base going to stand for that? I mean, it's there's kind of a hole right now, and I think that they definitely have to have a successful season next year, or there's going to be the natives will be growing restless.
Yeah, they will. And I go back yesterday. I pointed this out on Twitter. One of the things I asked John Beilein some questions after Indiana lost to Michigan in Bloomington back in January. I asked him because he had a similar experience in his first 3 years at Michigan. He actually, in the aggregate, had a losing record at Michigan his first 3 years. We tend to forget that because of the recent success, but Michigan showed him enough patience to allow him to build a culture, and he really emphasized the culture. But what he also said was that, you know what, sometimes other teams that are on the top just have to fall back and give you an opportunity to move up the ladder. And I think at the time that Michigan started getting better under Beilein was the same time that IU kind of imploded under Sampson. And wouldn't it be interesting, based on those comments, if Michigan now went through that, and that kind of created an opening for IU to move up the ranks a little bit.
Yeah, because another thing people may not realize is that Michigan had a large gap of not playing in the NCAA tournament. I mean, that was like, I don't know, maybe 9 years that they didn't play in the NCAA tournament before they got on this run.
Yeah, the natives were very restless with Beilein. Funny enough, they were really restless with him twice because, Michigan he got things going, around that time, around 2009, 10, and ultimately, won the Big Ten in 12 and reached the national championship game in 13. But then they kind of fell off again for a couple of years. And, fans being fans, there's very little rational thinking and patience. And they kind of got on him again. And then he's had another good run here the last few years. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think in the league as competitive as the Big Ten is right now, where, you have programs like Nebraska that, are bringing in a Fred Hoiberg and, really top to bottom, there's no easy games. I think it's really hard to sustain success. So, I think it's going to be incumbent for Miller to, have success in the 2020 recruiting class like we're talking about, and as well as probably have some teams like hopefully Michigan slip a little bit, or it's just going to, otherwise it's just going to kind of keep grinding and trying to find a way.
Talking with our friend Mike Schumann from the Daily Hoosier, and talking about that, the recruiting efforts now have focused on the 2020 class. A lot of Indiana kids in that, and some that are not also. But all those guys, a lot of those guys were in action over the past weekend up in Indianapolis with the EYBL. There was a lot of talent up there, man.
Yeah, I got a chance to spend some time there. I spent my entire Friday evening there and other parts of the weekend, and got a good look at a lot of the guys on the Nike circuit that IU is recruiting right now. Some guys that stood out to me. One, Indiana ended up offering DJ Stewart out of Chicago, who just absolutely exploded over the weekend, including, I didn't get to see his 46-point game on Sunday, but I saw a little bit of him on Saturday and Friday. He's a kid that's really explosive off the dribble, can really create his own opportunities, and he's a little hit or miss, no pun intended, with this 3-point shot, but a guy that, in a congested and physical Big Ten that can kind of create his own opportunities is really somebody that obviously attracted Indiana enough to make the offer over the weekend. The guy that I think, Indiana's probably farther along with than most people realize is Matt Cross. He's out of Boston. Indiana offered him a couple weeks ago, and I guess he's coming in for an official visit here in a couple weeks, which is a pretty quick turnaround, considering they just offered him. But he's a guy that you just look at. He's kind of a big 6'7", physical looking guy with a very surprising game. You think of him more as a power forward because he's 6'7", over 200. And looking at him, he has that traditional power forward look, but he's very fast, very good handles. He's going to play more of a stretch 4/wing type role in college, and he's a really good 3-point shooter. Somebody that's really kind of come along here in the last few months and garnered a lot of attention. So if Indiana can get on top of him and get him locked up here relatively early to get the class started, I think that would be a really good step forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned players like that because what it brings to mind to me is Indiana. I still don't know what Indiana's identity is. I know it's supposed to be about defense with the pack line and all that, but I don't know what their identity is.
Yeah, to me, the thing I keep going back to under Miller's entire tenure is I don't think that they've had the type of players that have been able to personify that identity. They haven't had any, dogs, if you will, tough guys. I keep going back to his Dayton years. If you read about his Dayton years, that's the type of teams that he had. And as well as I do, following this team and being in the locker room, that these are a bunch of nice guys on this roster. So I think he's got to find guys that have a little bit of an edge to them, a little bit of a nastiness to really bring across that culture and show what Miller's trying to do, because I don't think he's had the right type of kids to really exhibit that. I
agree with you, Mike. Mike Schumann from the Daily Hoosier. Grateful to have you on, man. Appreciate you as always.
All right, Jim. Have a great one, man.
Hey, thanks for listening to the rebroadcast from today's edition of Indiana Sports Beat with Jim Coyle, the only daily show dedicated to Indiana University athletics. You can catch us live each weekday on IndianaSportsBeat.com, TheDailyHoosier.com, GrowingTruth.com, or go to Spreaker.com for live notifications. Yeah, that's Speaker with an R, SPREAKER.com. You can also catch the entire show any place you listen to a podcast, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, etc. You can find and follow the show on Facebook or follow me on Twitter at Jim Coyle ISB for complete coverage of the Indiana Hoosiers. Thanks again. I hope you have a great day. I'm Jim Coyle, and I will see you on the radio.